Part 1. The Architects of Contempt. The message arrived on a Tuesday morning. Earth Standard Time. Fleet Admiral Taman stood in the communication center of the orbital station, watching the translated text scroll across the holographic display. He had waited 3 months for this response. 3 months since humanity had sent its first official greeting to the Galactic Assembly. The message was not what he had hoped for. Denied, he read aloud, his voice flat. The other officers in the room shifted uncomfortably.
Application for diplomatic contact denied.
Reason: species classified as primitive and potentially dangerous. Recommendation: remain within your home system until further evolutionary development occurs. The message came from the Velran Empire, the most powerful civilization in this region of space. They controlled 70 star systems and had been part of the Galactic Assembly for over 4,000 years. Their technology was impressive, their society was advanced, and their opinion of themselves was even higher. Taman scrolled through the rest of the document. The Velrans had clearly studied Earth from a distance. They had analyzed human history, human biology, and human culture. Every observation dripped with contempt. They called Earth a Class 9 death world, a planet so hostile that evolution had created monsters just to survive it. They noted that humans had fought over 600 major wars in recorded history. They pointed out that Earth's gravity was 3 times higher than standard, that its weather patterns were violent and unpredictable, and that its oceans contained enough salt to poison most known species. "They think we're savages," said Captain Hyunsik, reading over Taman's shoulder. He was younger than the Admiral, barely 40, but he had commanded more successful deep space missions than anyone else in the fleet. "They looked at our planet and decided we're not worth talking to." Taman nodded slowly. He understood the Velran perspective, even if it angered him. To species that evolved on gentler worlds, Earth must seem like a nightmare. Velra Prime, the Velran homeworld, had half Earth's gravity and weather that rarely varied more than 20 degrees. The Velrans themselves were tall and thin, with pale skin and large eyes adapted for their dim sun. They valued logic, efficiency, and genetic purity above all else. Violence was almost unknown in their society. Crime was statistically non-existent. And then there were humans. Short, dense, heavy-boned creatures from a planet that tried to kill them every day. Humans who had survived ice ages and supervolcanoes and asteroid impacts. Humans who had turned their violent nature toward conquering their own world, and now looked to the stars with the same hunger. "What do we do?" asked Hyunsik. Taman closed the message display. "We move forward. If they won't talk to us, we'll establish ourselves without their permission. We have colonies on Mars and Europa. We have the asteroid mining operations. We're building the generation ships for the neighboring systems. We don't need their approval." Over the following century, humanity did exactly that. While the Velrans ignored them, humans spread through their local space like a wildfire. They established mining colonies on hostile moons. They built stations in the crushing gravity wells of gas giants. They sent explorer ships to systems the Velrans had marked as too dangerous or too resource-poor to bother with. Every challenge made them stronger. Every setback taught them something new. Captain Hyunsik led the first expedition beyond the local cluster. His ship, the Pathfinder, spent 5 years exploring 12 systems, mapping habitable worlds and cataloging resources. When he returned, he brought data that changed everything. There were dozens of systems within reach, and most of them were empty. The Velrans had claimed vast territories but only occupied a fraction of it. There was room for humanity to grow if they were willing to work for it. The Velran response to human expansion was predictable. They filed formal complaints with the Galactic Assembly, claiming that humans were violating territorial agreements. The Assembly reviewed the case and ruled in humanity's favor. The systems humans had settled were technically unclaimed, and the Velrans had no legal grounds to stop them. But the Velrans did everything else they could to make life difficult. They blocked human trade requests. They forbade other species from sharing technology with Earth. They spread rumors that humans were dangerous warmongers who couldn't be trusted. Some species listened. Others were curious about these newcomers from the death world. A few even reached out in secret, trading information and goods despite Velran disapproval. Humanity learned about galactic politics, about energy shields and faster-than-light communication, about the hundreds of species that called the galaxy home. And they adapted it all, combining alien concepts with human innovation to create something new. Back on Velra Prime, the Velran Council barely noticed. They had more important concerns than a single primitive species on the edge of their territory. Their economy was strong, their military was powerful, and their influence in the assembly was secure. Commander Mirai, one of their youngest fleet officers, had reviewed the human situation and filed a report suggesting that humanity might become a valuable ally in the future. Her superiors dismissed it. Why would the Velran Empire need allies from a death world? Engineer Dongwu, working in Earth's largest orbital shipyard, would have laughed if he'd known about that report. The Velrans thought humans needed them. The truth was exactly the opposite. Every year, human technology advanced at a rate that shocked even humanity's few alien friends. Earth scientists and engineers approached problems differently than other species. They expected failure. They built redundancies into everything. They tested their designs in the harshest conditions imaginable, because those were the conditions they knew. A Velran ship was a work of art, sleek and efficient, designed to operate in the controlled environment of civilized space. A human ship looked brutal by comparison, all sharp angles and heavy armor built to take damage and keep fighting. The weapons were different too. Velrans used energy weapons that were precise and clean. Humans used kinetic weapons that hit like hammers. Velran shields could deflect lasers beautifully. Human railguns just punched straight through. Lieutenant Su Yun, monitoring communications from Earth's deep space network, sometimes wondered what would happen if humans and Velrans ever fought. She hoped they never would, but she also knew that if it came to war, the Velrans would be in for a terrible surprise. Humans had been fighting each other for thousands of years. They knew war in ways the Velrans couldn't imagine, but war between humans and Velrans never came. Something else did, something worse. And when it arrived, the galaxy would learn that the most dangerous thing about Deathworlders wasn't their capacity for violence. It was their absolute refusal to give up, no matter what stood against them. On a small listening post at the edge of Velran space, sensors detected something strange. A research station had stopped transmitting. It wasn't unusual. Equipment failed sometimes. But when a patrol ship went to investigate 3 days later, they found the station destroyed and everyone aboard missing. The ship that discovered it sent a brief message back to Velra Prime before its transmission cut off mid-sentence. In the Velran Council chambers, the report was filed and forgotten. It was probably pirates, they decided, or maybe an accident. Nothing to worry about. The Velrans had been safe for so long that they had forgotten what real danger looked like. They would remember soon enough. Part 3. Pride. Before the fall. The fall of the Velran Empire happened faster than anyone thought possible. System after system disappeared from the communication network. Entire fleets went to battle and never returned. The Hrevex pushed forward like a tide, consuming everything in their path and growing stronger with each victory. Within 6 months, the Velrans had lost a quarter of their territory. Within a year, half their military was gone. Commander Mirai stood on the bridge of her third ship, the previous 2 having been destroyed under her command. She was one of the few surviving senior officers, promoted not because of her brilliance but because everyone above her was dead. The weight of command sat heavy on her shoulders as she watched another retreat play out on the tactical display. 5 cruisers had engaged a Hrevex swarm near the mining world of Kaltos. 3 were already destroyed. The remaining 2 were running for their lives. "This is how it ends," said her new tactical officer, a young man who had graduated from the academy just 4 months ago. "We keep retreating until there's nowhere left to retreat to." Mirai wanted to disagree, but she couldn't. The Velran military had been designed for peacekeeping and border patrol, not total war. Their ships were fast and elegant, perfect for showing power and projecting authority. But against an enemy that attacked in waves of thousands, that regenerated damage within hours, that learned from every battle, elegance meant nothing. On Velra Prime, the council chambers were in chaos. High Counselor Yuna called for order repeatedly, her voice barely rising above the shouting. Half the council wanted to evacuate the homeworld and establish a government in exile. The other half demanded they fight to the last ship, the last soldier, the last breath. Nobody had any useful suggestions for how to actually win. "We must send the distress call," Yuna said for the 3rd time that session. "We cannot survive this alone. Pride is meaningless if we're all dead. You want us to beg, demanded one of the younger counselors. The Velran Empire has stood for 4,000 years. We will not humiliate ourselves by crawling to lesser species for help. Yuna's patience finally broke. There will be no empire left to humiliate if we don't act. The Hravex don't care about our pride. They don't care about our history. They see us as food and materials, nothing more. We need allies, and we need them now. The vote was called. It passed by a single vote, the narrowest possible margin. The message was prepared. A formal distress call translated into every language in the Galactic database. It offered trade agreements, technology sharing, and political concessions to any civilization willing to send military aid. The transmission went out across all frequencies, reaching every corner of known space, including Earth. Engineer Dongwu was working late in the orbital shipyard when the message came through. He read it 3 times, making sure he understood correctly. The Velrans, who had rejected humanity's friendship, who had called them primitive savages, who had spent a century trying to isolate Earth from the rest of the galaxy, were asking for help. He forwarded it to Fleet Command and waited to see what would happen. Admiral Taman received the message in his office on Luna Base. He read it carefully, then pulled up the classified reports from Lieutenant Suhyun. Her analysis was clear. The Hravex were an existential threat, not just to the Velrans but to everyone. If they broke through Velran space, they would spread across the galaxy like a plague. Someone had to stop them, and the Velrans clearly couldn't do it alone. He called an emergency meeting of Earth's Defense Council. Military leaders from every nation gathered in the conference room, their faces grim as they reviewed the data. The debate that followed was heated. Many wanted to ignore the Velran distress call. Let them suffer, they argued. Let them learn what it feels like to be dismissed and rejected. But Captain Hyunsik stood up and cut through the arguments. This isn't about the Velrans, he said quietly. This is about survival. If the Hravex consume Velran space, they'll turn toward the core systems. That means Earth is next. We can either fight them now with whatever help the Velrans can provide, or we can fight them later when we're alone and they're even stronger. I know which option I prefer. The room fell silent. Taman looked around at the assembled leaders and saw understanding dawn on their faces. This wasn't revenge or charity. This was strategic necessity. Recommendation? He asked Hyunsik. Deploy immediately. Every ship we can spare. Hit the Hravex hard before they realize we're there. Show the galaxy what Deathworlders can do. Taman nodded slowly. Approved. Captain, you'll lead the first fleet. I want you ready to launch within 72 hours. What Taman didn't mention was that Hyunsik's fleet was already prepared. The ships were fueled, the weapons were loaded, and the crews were briefed. Earth's intelligence network had been tracking the Hravex for months. When it became clear that the Velrans were losing, Taman had made the decision to mobilize. The distress call from Velra Prime had arrived weeks after the human fleet was already on its way. Lieutenant Suhyun coordinated the final preparations from her station at Farpoint. She monitored Velran communications and watched their situation deteriorate hour by hour. The Hravex had reached the inner colonies. Velra Prime itself was threatened. The Velran military was down to a fraction of its original strength. Every day the casualty reports grew longer. On Velra Prime, Commander Mirai led the last major defense fleet in a desperate attempt to slow the Hravex advance. 50 ships against a swarm of thousands. She knew it was hopeless, but she also knew that every hour she bought was another hour for civilians to evacuate, for children to reach the transport ships, for culture and knowledge to be saved from annihilation. The battle was brutal. Mirai's fleet fought with everything they had, using tactics that would have been considered reckless in peacetime. They rammed Hravex bioships. They detonated power cores inside enemy swarms. They fought until their weapons ran dry and then fought with whatever was left. Mirai's ship took hit after hit, the shields failing, the hull cracking, the crew dying around her. All ships, this is Commander Mirai, she broadcast on the fleet channel. It's been an honor serving with you. For Velra Prime, for the Empire, for everyone we love. The Velran ships closed ranks and prepared for their final stand. The Hravex swarm surrounded them, moving in for the kill. On Velra Prime below, millions watched the battle on their screens, knowing they were watching their defenders die. And then something impossible happened. The sensors detected a massive distortion at the edge of the system. Ships were emerging from faster-than-light travel, dozens of them appearing in perfect formation. The signatures were unknown, aggressive, and moving at combat speed directly toward the battle. For a moment, everyone thought it was more Ravex. Then the identification signals came through and Mirai couldn't believe what she was reading. They were human ships. The Deathworlders had come. Captain Hyunsik stood on the bridge of the UEC Indomitable, his flagship, watching the tactical display as his fleet completed the jump. 50 warships, the largest battle group humanity had ever assembled, appearing in Velran space with weapons hot and shields raised. He could see the Velran fleet on his screens, battered and surrounded, moments from destruction. All ships. This is Hyunsik. Weapons free. Show them what we've got. The human fleet didn't slow down. They didn't broadcast diplomatic messages or ask for permission. They simply attacked, slamming into the Hravex swarm with a violence that shocked everyone watching. Railguns fired at a rate of hundreds of rounds per second. Missile batteries launched swarms of their own, each warhead guided by dedicated targeting computers. Plasma cannons superheated the space around them. The Hravex had never faced anything like this. Neither had the Velrans. Commander Mirai watched in stunned silence as human ships tore through the enemy, taking damage that should have destroyed them and simply refusing to die. She saw a human destroyer lose half its hull to a Hravex ramming attack and keep fighting. She watched a cruiser spin through evasive maneuvers that would have killed a Velran crew from the G-forces alone. "Who are they?" whispered her tactical officer. Mirai knew exactly who they were. They were the species her people had rejected, the savages from the Death World, the primitives who weren't supposed to matter, and they were saving the Velran Empire. Part 2. The swarm emerges. The attack started slowly at first. A mining colony on the edge of Velran space went silent. Then an agricultural world stopped responding to hails. Then a freight convoy disappeared between star systems, leaving only debris and scattered distress signals that cut off after seconds. The Velran Council called emergency meetings. They reviewed the data and tried to find patterns. Pirates, they thought at first. Perhaps a new criminal organization testing their defenses. Commander Mirai knew better. She had commanded patrol ships on the frontier for 15 years, and she understood how pirates operated. They struck fast and ran faster. They took cargo and prisoners for ransom. They avoided military targets. Whatever was destroying these settlements wasn't interested in profit. It was interested in annihilation. She stood on the bridge of her cruiser, the Eternal Dawn, studying the tactical display. 3 more colonies had gone dark in the past week. All of them were on the outer rim, all relatively isolated, all defended by minimal military presence. The pattern was clear to her even if the Council refused to see it. Something was pushing into Velran space from the galactic edge, moving inward in a steady wave. "Commander, we're approaching the Helios station coordinates," reported her tactical officer. Mirai nodded. Helios had been a research facility studying stellar phenomena. 2,000 scientists and support staff had lived there. Now its emergency beacon was screaming into the void, and nobody was answering communication attempts. The station appeared on their screens, and Mirai felt her blood run cold. Half of it was simply gone. The remaining sections were torn apart, hull plating ripped away like paper. Scorch marks covered the structure, but they didn't match any weapon signature in the Velran database, and there were things attached to the wreckage, organic things that pulsed and moved. "What am I looking at?" Mirai whispered. Her science officer, a veteran named Jiwon who had transferred from Velra Prime's prestigious academy, worked frantically at her console. "I'm reading biological matter, Commander. Lots of it. The energy signatures are... This doesn't make sense. These things are alive, but they're also technological. Some kind of biomechanical hybrid." Before Mirai could respond, the sensors screamed warnings. Ships were emerging from behind the station's far side. But calling them ships felt wrong. They looked like insects. Massive beetles made of chitin and metal, with wings that weren't wings but some kind of propulsion system that left trails of green energy. There were dozens of them, then hundreds. "Battle stations," Mirai shouted. "All weapons online. Get us away from that station." The Eternal Dawn was a modern Velran cruiser, fast and well-armed. Its energy weapons could punch holes through asteroids. Its shields could deflect missiles and lasers with ease. Mirai had trained for combat her entire career, but nothing had prepared her for what happened next. The enemy ships moved like living things because they were living things. They swarmed the Eternal Dawn from every angle, moving in patterns that made no tactical sense but somehow worked perfectly. Velran weapons fire destroyed the first wave, cutting through their organic hulls with precision. But there were always more. For everyone they killed, 3 took its place. "They're not avoiding our fire," said the tactical officer, his voice rising in panic. "They're just accepting casualties and pushing through." Mirai understood the horror of what he was saying. Velron military doctrine relied on calculated risk. Ships were valuable. Crews were irreplaceable. You didn't throw lives away in suicide charges. But these creatures didn't care about losses. They fought like a swarm of insects attacking a threat to their hive. Individual lives meant nothing. Only the objective mattered. The Eternal Dawn's shields flickered under the sustained assault. The enemy weapons were crude, nothing but biological projectiles and corrosive compounds, but there were so many of them. The ship shuddered as something latched onto the hull. Mirai watched in horror as the security feeds showed insect-like creatures cutting through the outer doors, their mandibles working through metal that should have been impenetrable. "Seal all corridors," she ordered. "Vent the affected sections to space." It bought them time, but not much. The enemy was learning, adapting. The second boarding attempt came from 3 different directions simultaneously. Mirai made the hardest decision of her life and ordered her ship to retreat. The Eternal Dawn jumped to faster-than-light speed, leaving Helios Station and its mysteries behind. Back at Velra Prime, Mirai's report caused chaos in the council chambers. She showed them footage of the attack. She presented Jiwan's analysis of the enemy biology. She explained that this wasn't a raid or a criminal operation. This was an invasion force, and it was pushing toward the heart of Velran space. The council members argued for hours. Some wanted to send a massive fleet to crush the enemy immediately. Others wanted to establish defensive positions and wait for more information. A few even suggested negotiating, trying to communicate with these newcomers. Mirai sat through it all, exhausted and frustrated. Every hour they debated was another hour the enemy had to advance. Lieutenant Soo-hyun sat in her monitoring station at Earth's Farpoint Station, 12 light-years from Velron space. Her job was to listen to everything happening in the galaxy, sorting through countless transmissions for anything interesting. When the encrypted military chatter from Velra Prime suddenly tripled in volume, she paid attention. When she cracked the encryption and read what they were saying, she immediately forwarded it to Fleet Command. The report reached Admiral Taman within an hour. He read it twice, then called Captain Hyunsik to his office. "We have a problem," he said, showing him Soo-hyun's analysis. "Something is attacking the Velrans. Something biological, highly aggressive, and moving fast. The Velrans are calling it the Hravex." Hyunsik studied the data carefully. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that their outer colonies are falling one after another. Bad enough that their military is taking serious casualties." Taman pulled up a star chart. "The Hravex are coming from the intergalactic void. If they're following the density of systems, they'll push straight through Velran space and into the galactic core. That means they'll eventually reach us." "Do the Velrans know we're monitoring them?" Taman shook his head. "They're too focused on their own survival to worry about what humans are doing." "But Hyunsik, if these creatures break through Velran space, we're next in line. And from what I'm seeing, the Velrans aren't winning. Their military wasn't built for this kind of fight." Engineer Dongwoo received orders to begin retrofitting the fleet for extended combat operations. He stood in the shipyard looking at the human warships docked for maintenance. They were ugly compared to Velran vessels, brutal and functional. But right now, brutal and functional was exactly what the situation required. He started calculating how much ammunition they could manufacture in the next 3 months. On Velra Prime, Commander Mirai led 3 more battles against the Hravex over the following weeks. She won 1, lost 2, and barely escaped the 3rd. Every engagement taught her something new about the enemy. They were relentless. They adapted quickly. They showed no fear and took no prisoners. And they were consuming everything they conquered, breaking down organic and inorganic matter alike to fuel their expansion. The Velran Council finally accepted the truth. This wasn't an invasion they could defeat with their current forces. This was an extinction-level threat. High Counselor Yuna, the eldest member of the council, proposed something that would have been unthinkable a year ago. They needed to call for help. The debate lasted 3 days. Pride warred with survival. The Velran Empire had stood alone for millennia. Asking for aid felt like admitting weakness. But as reports came in of another 5 colonies destroyed, another 4 fleets decimated, the vote was called. By a single vote, the council agreed to send a distress call to the Galactic Assembly. The message was composed carefully, translated into every known language, and broadcast across all frequencies. It was a formal request for military assistance, offering trade concessions and technology sharing in return. They sent it to everyone, even to the species they had previously rejected, even to the humans on their death world. What the Velrans didn't know was that humanity had been tracking the Hravex threat for weeks. Admiral Taman had already made his decision. Captain Hunsik's fleet was already fueled and loaded. The crews were already briefed. The humans were coming. Not because the Velrans asked, not because they deserved help, but because someone had to stop the Hravex before they consumed the entire galaxy. And if there was one thing humans knew how to do, it was fight. Part 4. Monsters from a Death Planet. The battle for Velra Prime lasted 18 hours. For Commander Mirai and her surviving crew, those 18 hours felt like a lifetime. They watched the human fleet fight in ways that defied every principle of Velran military doctrine. Where Velran ships were designed to avoid damage through speed and shields, human ships seemed built to take punishment and keep fighting. Where Velran tactics emphasized precision and efficiency, human tactics were pure controlled chaos. Captain Hyunsik's flagship, the Indomitable, led from the front rather than coordinating from a safe distance. The massive dreadnought carved through the Hravex swarm like a knife, its railguns firing constantly, its armor absorbing impacts that would have crippled any Velran vessel. Behind it, destroyers and frigates worked in tight formations, covering each other's flanks and creating kill zones where nothing could survive. "They're insane," said Mirai's tactical officer, watching a human cruiser execute a spinning maneuver that brought it within meters of a Hravex bioship. The cruiser's point defense gun shredded the enemy at close range. Then it boosted away before the dying bioship could explode. Those G-forces should have killed everyone on board. Mirai understood what she was seeing. Humans came from a high-gravity world. Their bodies were denser, their bones stronger, their cardiovascular systems built to handle forces that would cause other species to black out. They could survive maneuvers that physics itself seemed to forbid, and they used that advantage ruthlessly. The Hravex adapted quickly, as they always did. They started targeting damaged human ships, swarming them with dozens of bioships at once. But the humans had planned for that too. When the Hravex concentrated their forces, human missile batteries launched coordinated strikes that turned entire sections of space into fireballs. When the Hravex dispersed to avoid the missiles, human railguns picked them off one by one with terrifying accuracy. Tactical Officer Yunji, aboard the human carrier Relentless, coordinated the fighter squadrons with cold precision. Velran fighters were automated drones, controlled from a safe distance to avoid casualties. Human fighters had pilots inside them, living beings who made split-second decisions and took risks no computer would approve. Those pilots dove into Hravex swarms, fired at point-blank range, and somehow survived to do it again. The Hravex began to retreat. It was the first time Mirai had ever seen them pull back from a battle. The swarm that had been moments away from destroying her fleet suddenly broke apart, individual bioships scattering in different directions. The human ships didn't let them go. They pursued, hunting down stragglers with methodical efficiency, making sure nothing escaped to report back to the main Hravex force. When the battle finally ended, Mirai's sensors counted the cost. 12 human ships destroyed, 20 more damaged severely enough to need extensive repairs. But the Hravex swarm was annihilated. Thousands of bioships drifted in pieces through the orbital space around Velra Prime. The immediate threat was gone. Hunsik opened a communication channel to the Velran fleet. "This is Captain Hunsik of the United Earth Coalition. Velran forces, please respond." Mirai stared at the communication request for a long moment. Then she activated her own transmitter. "This is Commander Mirai of the Velran Defense Fleet. Captain, you have our gratitude. Without your intervention, we would have been destroyed. We can discuss gratitude later, Commander. Right now, I need a situation report. What's the status of your military? How many ships do you have left? Where are the main Hravex forces concentrated?" The blunt, direct questions startled Mirai. Velran communication protocols emphasized courtesy and formality. But she recognized the wisdom in Hunsik's approach. There was no time for pleasantries when an extinction-level threat was still out there. She transmitted everything she knew about the Hravex movements, the lost territories, the casualties, the failed defensive strategies. Hunsik reviewed the data in silence. Then he made a decision that would change everything. Commander Mirai, I'm requesting permission to establish a forward command base on Velra Prime. My fleet needs to resupply and repair. More importantly, we need to coordinate with your remaining forces. The Raveks aren't defeated. We just won one battle. The war is still very much active. On Velra Prime below, High Counselor Yuna received Hyunsik's request with mixed feelings. Pride warred with pragmatism in her mind. Allowing human forces on the Velran homeworld meant admitting that the Empire could no longer defend itself. It meant accepting human leadership in military matters. It meant the end of Velran superiority, at least in this context. But the alternative was extinction. Yuna had seen the casualty reports. She had watched her civilization crumble. She had sent the distress call knowing what it would cost. Now the humans had answered that call, and they were offering not just assistance but genuine military partnership. She called for a council vote and was unsurprised when it passed with only 2 dissenting voices. The human fleet entered orbit around Velra Prime 3 hours later. Admiral Taman arrived with reinforcements, bringing the human presence to over 100 ships. The sight of so many human vessels in Velran space caused panic in some quarters and relief in others. But everyone recognized that everything had changed. Taman established his command center in a military complex on Velra Prime's surface. The Velran officers who met him were shocked by his appearance. They had expected someone imposing given his reputation. Instead, they saw a relatively short man with graying hair and tired eyes. But when he started speaking, laying out a comprehensive strategy for countering the Raveks' advance, everyone in the room understood why humans had made him their fleet commander. Engineer Dongwu arrived with the supply ships, bringing weapons, ammunition, and equipment in quantities that stunned the Velran logistics officers. He set up shop in their largest armory and started teaching Velran engineers how to manufacture human weapons. The lessons were eye-opening for both sides. Your energy weapons are elegant, Dongwu explained to a group of Velran military scientists. They're efficient and clean. But they require complex power systems and have limited penetration against organic armor. Our kinetic weapons are crude by your standards. They're loud, they have recoil, they need ammunition, but they punch holes in things reliably, and we can manufacture them quickly. One of the Velran scientists objected. Surely there's a more sophisticated approach than simply throwing metal at high speeds. Dongwu smiled. Sophistication is great until it fails. Simple systems work when sophisticated ones break down. We learned that the hard way on Earth. Our planet doesn't forgive complexity. It rewards things that are tough and reliable. The cultural exchange went both ways. Lieutenant Soo-hyun worked with Velran intelligence officers, combining human signals analysis with Velran sensor networks. Science officer Ji-won shared her biological studies of the Raveks with human researchers, and together they started finding weaknesses in the enemy's regeneration systems. Sergeant Jinho arrived with the first wave of human ground forces. He was a short, muscular man covered in scars from a dozen conflicts. The Velran soldiers assigned to train with him were initially dismissive. Then he showed them what human close-quarters combat looked like, and several ended up in the medical center with injuries that would take weeks to heal. You fight like machines, Jinho told them bluntly. You're trained to follow procedures and maintain formation. That works fine against pirates or criminals. Against the Raveks, procedures will get you killed. You need to learn how to fight dirty, to improvise, to keep going when everything goes wrong. The training was brutal. Velran soldiers collapsed from exhaustion, some quit, but others started to understand what Jinho was teaching them. They learned that survival wasn't about following rules. It was about refusing to give up. Commander Mirai observed one of these training sessions and found herself thinking about everything her people had believed. The Velrans had considered themselves superior because they were civilized, logical, and peaceful. They had looked down on humans as violent primitives. But now those violent primitives were teaching her people how to survive. Captain Hyunsik spent his days planning the counteroffensive. The Raveks controlled 12 systems, and they were building more bioships constantly. Every day humans waited was another day the enemy grew stronger. But Hyunsik also knew that rushing in without proper preparation would just result in more casualties. He studied every battle report, every sensor reading, every piece of data about Raveks tactics, and slowly, a plan took shape. The Raveks thought like a hive, coordinating through some kind of biological network. If humans could disrupt that network even temporarily, the bioships would lose coordination. If they lost coordination, they could be defeated in detail. The question was how to disrupt something they didn't fully understand. Lieutenant Soo-hyun thought she might have an answer. She had been analyzing HFY's communication patterns for weeks, and she believed she had found the carrier frequency they used. If she was right, human ships could jam it. If she was wrong, they would be flying into battle with a critical system failure. Hyunsik made the decision. We tested in a small engagement first. One system, limited forces. If it works, we scale up. If it doesn't, we adapt and try something else. That was the human way. Try something. If it fail, Part 5. Deathworlders Doctrine. The first test of Lieutenant Soo-hyun's jamming system came at the colony world of Theros 6. The HFY had conquered it 3 months earlier, turning the mining installations into breeding grounds for more bioships. Intelligence reports suggested roughly 500 HFY vessels in the system, along with ground forces that had converted the colony infrastructure into organic fortifications. Captain Hyunsik led a combined fleet of 30 human ships and 15 Velran vessels. It was the first time the two species had fought together as planned allies rather than desperate defenders. Commander Mirai commanded the Velran contingent from her new ship, a heavy cruiser that had been retrofitted with human weapons and armor plating. The combination of technologies looked strange, but field tests showed it was devastatingly effective. All ships, this is Hyunsik. Remember, we're testing new equipment today. If the jamming works, the HFY will lose coordination. If it doesn't, we fight them the old way and adapt. Either way, we're taking this system back. The fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Theros 6's gravity well. Immediately, the HFY swarm began forming up, hundreds of bioships moving into attack formation. Hyunsik gave the order and Soo-hyun activated the jamming system. For a moment, nothing seemed to change. Then the HFY formation fell apart. Individual bioships started flying in random directions, some colliding with each other, others simply drifting without purpose. The hive coordination had been disrupted, leaving each creature to act on instinct rather than collective intelligence. It's working, breathed Tactical Officer Yoonji from her station aboard the Relentless. They're confused. They don't know what to do. Then let's not give them time to figure it out, Hyunsik ordered. All ships weapons free. Hit them hard. The battle was still brutal, but for the first time, the humans and Velrans had a decisive advantage. The HFY fought back savagely, but without coordination, they couldn't concentrate their forces effectively. Human railguns picked them off in groups. Velran energy weapons, finally able to target individual enemies without being overwhelmed, carved through bioship hulls with precision. Sergeant Jinho led the first ground assault, taking a force of human marines and Velran soldiers to reclaim the colony surface. What they found there was nightmare fuel. The HFY had converted every structure into organic matter, covering buildings in pulsing membranes and filling chambers with egg sacs. The colonists were long gone, either killed or consumed. The ground fighting was vicious and close quarters. Jinho's training paid off as his mixed unit fought through the converted colony, using flamethrowers and explosives to burn out HFY nests. The Velran soldiers, who had never seen combat like this, pushed through their fear and fought alongside their human counterparts. By the time they secured the colony, everyone was covered in burns and bruises, but they had won. Theros 6 was retaken after 8 hours of continuous battle. The cost was 3 human ships destroyed and 2 Velran cruisers heavily damaged, but the HFY's presence in the system was eliminated. More importantly, the jamming system worked. Humanity had found a weapon that gave them an edge. Admiral Taemin reviewed the battle reports and immediately ordered the jamming technology installed on every ship in the fleet. Engineer Dongwoo worked around the clock, training both human and Velran engineers on the systems. Within 2 weeks, the combined fleet had grown to over 200 ships, all equipped with the new technology. The counteroffensive began in earnest. System after system, the combined fleet pushed the HFY back. Each battle was different. Each required new tactics and solutions. The HFY adapted constantly, developing countermeasures to human weapons and finding ways to partially resist the jamming. But humans adapted faster. That was what Deathworlders did. They survived by changing, by learning, by refusing to accept defeat. Commander Mirai found herself learning more in those months than she had in her entire previous career. She watched Hyunsik make decisions that seemed reckless by Velran standards but somehow worked. She saw human crews take damage that should have destroyed them, and somehow keep their ships functional through sheer determination and improvisation. She learned that there was a difference between following optimal strategy and winning at any cost. One battle stood out in her memory. The fleet was attacking a HFY stronghold in the Kepler system when a human destroyer took catastrophic damage. The ship was crippled, venting atmosphere, its reactor threatening to explode. Velran protocol would have been to evacuate the crew and scuttle the vessel. Instead, the human captain held position, using his dying ship as a weapons platform to cover a Velran cruiser that had lost its shields. Why didn't they abandon ship? Mirai asked Hyunsik afterward. Because they knew that cruiser needed cover and they were in position to provide it, Hyunsik answered simply. The destroyer crew bought time for the cruiser to repair its shields and get clear. Sometimes the mission is more important than individual survival. But they died. Yes. And they knew they might when they volunteered for this fight. That's the thing about humans, Commander. We're not fearless. We get scared just like anyone else. But we decided a long time ago that some things are worth dying for. Protecting others is one of them. Mirai thought about that conversation often in the months that followed. She began to understand that human strength didn't come from superior technology or tactics. It came from a fundamental unwillingness to give up, combined with a willingness to sacrifice for the greater good. These were the qualities that a death world instilled in its children. High Counselor Yuna spent her days working with Admiral Taman on strategy and politics. The Velran Council had been forced to accept human leadership in military matters, but they still tried to maintain control over diplomatic decisions. Yuna was caught in the middle, trying to balance her people's pride with the reality of their dependence on human support. Your people saved us, she told Taman during one of their private meetings. I understand that, but my people are struggling to accept what that means. For 4,000 years we believed we were the pinnacle of civilization. Having to be rescued by species we considered primitive is destroying our sense of identity. Taman nodded sympathetically. I understand. But, Counselor, you need to let go of that thinking. Primitive and advanced are meaningless terms. What matters is survival and adaptation. Your people are sophisticated and intelligent. Those are valuable traits. My people are stubborn and hard to kill. That's valuable too. Together we're stronger than either species alone. The combined fleet continued its advance, but the cost in lives and resources was staggering. Every system they retook required repairs, resupply, and reinforcements. Human casualties mounted into the thousands. Velran losses were proportionally even higher, as their ships remained more fragile despite the upgrades. Science Officer Jiwon made a breakthrough 6 months into the counteroffensive. She discovered that the HFY had a central hive structure, a massive biological construct that coordinated the entire swarm across multiple systems. It was located on a moon in the Vortex Nebula, converted into a breeding facility capable of producing thousands of bioships per month. Destroy that facility, and the HFY invasion would collapse. The problem was that the facility was defended by the largest concentration of HFY forces anyone had seen. Estimates suggested over 10,000 bioships in the system, along with ground forces and biological defenses that made previous strongholds look weak by comparison. Attacking it would require every ship in the combined fleet and would likely result in catastrophic casualties. We have to do it, Hyunsik said when the command staff reviewed the intelligence. If we don't take out that facility, the HFY will just keep replacing their losses faster than we can destroy them. We'll fight a war of attrition we can't win. The casualties will be enormous, said Commander Mirai quietly. Even with our best tactics and the jamming systems, we're talking about a prolonged battle against an enemy that outnumbers us 20-1. I know, Hyunsik said, but that's why we're here. Humans don't run from impossible odds. We run toward them. Admiral Taman authorized the operation. Every ship that could still fight was assigned to the assault. Engineers worked around the clock to repair damaged vessels. Weapons factories operated at maximum capacity. Medical bays were cleared and prepared for mass casualties. Everyone knew this would be the decisive battle of the war. Lieutenant Su-yun enhanced the jamming systems one final time, pushing them to maximum power. She knew they might overload and burn out during the battle, but if they could disrupt the HFY's coordination for even a few hours, it might be enough. Sergeant Jinho volunteered to lead the ground assault on the hive facility itself. It would be a suicide mission. Everyone knew it. But Jinho had trained both human and Velran soldiers for this exact scenario. They would deploy in the chaos of the space battle, infiltrate the facility, and destroy it from within. If they succeeded, the Hravex would lose their ability to coordinate and reproduce. If they failed, the space battle would go on until one side was completely destroyed. Engineer Dongwu developed special weapons for the ground assault.